If you ever looked at your team using AI and thought, why exactly is this still messy? Then I would argue that today's episode is for you. Because at the end of the day, what you'll realize is that the tool in the workflow might be fine, but the system that you've built around it is not. So what today's episode focuses on is how AI systems still end up failing between the AI tools. Ultimately, they fail because context is moved between steps badly, which ultimately ends up creating more automated rework, and data governance and AI governance ends up living in the document. So with all that said in mind, let's go ahead and get straight into it. So let's just go ahead and start with the first failure point, which is the failure that happens between a bad context transfer among AI agents. So the main question that ends up happening is, yes, we can have production ready communication standards between our AI agents and have governance policies, but can they communicate and coordinate properly? And that's what the first question kind of answers. That leads us into our first story, where AI agents and their handoffs ended up becoming the real AI bottleneck, especially now that we have so many AI tools out there. Learning how to really connect them and integrate them with each other and make sure that the outputs that one AI agent is sending to another is something that we can coordinate efficiently between them. So if every AI step ends up working by itself, I guess that's the big guiding question here, is if every AI step is working in isolation, then why exactly does the workflow still break when you connect them all? Well, I guess the answer is kind of in the question is, well, you have AI agents working in isolation. I want to bring up a metaphor in this case. So if you were to have, let's just say, for instance, a team, that team obviously needs communication between each other. Certain team members have certain tasks, and those tasks are, to a certain extent, context for another team member's tasks or their responsibilities. We want to think of an AI system, and more in particular, an AI agentic system in the same way. Think of them as a team of AI agents. The AI agents all end up having their own preset defined tasks, and your job as the AI operator, or in this case, the AI systems operator, or whatever you want to call yourself, your main task is being able to connect all of those agents in a way that plays to each one of their strengths. You might have an agent that focuses on drafting emails or summarizing meetings. And then you'll have another AI agent that ends up taking that summary or the transcript from that meeting and have it parse through what are the main pain points that were, I guess, identified, and taking those pain points and applying it to the broader scheme of all of the meetings that you've gone through. Let's just say that you're a sales operator, for instance. That's one type of context in which you would have AI agents taking a lot of the administrative work that a sales team might have. So this was according to a V1 announcement, a version 1 announcement by the A to A protocol. And what is A to A? A to A is just an acronym for an abbreviation for agents to agent. So most agents now we want to build out these things called agent to agent protocols. And what A to A V1 ended up describing is that it's the first stable production-ready version of the standard communication between AI agents. So that's actually a really good step forward, because we want to obviously be able to have our AI agents, which are extremely high processing power agents that can communicate with each other. We want them to be able to communicate with each other. That's the main goal, is because they're extremely intelligent. They can do their jobs really well. But if they have the wrong context and if they have the wrong outputs because of the wrong inputs, that's going to be a problem for whenever you as an AI operator are going to actually begin integrating them and connecting them together. So it says here also, A to A is built so agents can delegate subtasks, exchange information, coordinate actions across more complex workflows. And the V1 releases multi-tenancy, signed agent cards, security workflows, and version negotiation. The practical signal is that the market is moving from can an agent do one task to can multiple agents coordinate reliably. So for those of you who remember when ChatGPT released back in 2021, 2022, it was a big thing because the ChatGPT model, LLM, was able to do a lot of crazy things. It was writing poems. It wasn't creating poems. That's one thing I would say. It was writing poems because it was basing it off of previous poems in history, but it was still writing poems that were kind of good. were pretty good. Obviously, people were able to identify whether something was written by AI at that time, but nowadays it's starting to become a lot harder. There are still certain features that you'll be able to find in AI writing, but the agents can do one task, right? I think that was the second phase that we ended up with the AI in the AI revolution is you've got agents being able to do one task. So you saw that whenever NAN released their AI agent node, you'll see in those other automation tools like Make or Zapier, where they ended up creating their own AI agent connectors or AI nodes. And those were a big thing because you ended up just connecting any type of LLM to using an API, and you prompted it to accomplish a certain task. You gave it certain inputs, and you told it, hey, this is the deterministic output that you need to give each time. So you gave it a format to follow. You gave it a format to take in and a format to output. And that was great because, you didn't have to continually keep prompting the LLMs to give you certain outputs. And now we're moving into a next phase where it's no longer just us coordinating between agents, but it's providing these agents to a certain extent autonomy to learn how to communicate with each other and coordinate with each other. So how do you end up doing that? Well, it's kind of the same way that you would view a prompt for a specific agent. So if you were to tell an agent, hey, I need you to read every time you get an email. I like using emails because it's the most relatable for most folks. But every time you get an email from, let's just say, a possible prospect that's coming to your inbound emails, I want you to be able to, and then this is in your prompt, you need to parse through the whole email. That's the first step. Understand what's going on in it, and then categorize what type of email this is. Is it a customer inquiry? Is it a complaint? Is it a sponsor reaching out to us? Whatever it is, you lay that out inside of the prompt, and then it outputs in a specific way because you've laid out how it's supposed to be outputted. So you say, hey, output this in the JSON format following you need to output it in this way, you need to output the type of category, the type of score that you gave it, who's the person we need to respond to, so on and so forth. So you give it a structured output. So think of that as the same way of looking at A to A protocol, but instead of just providing directions for one agent, you're providing directions for multiple agents. So an example I can provide is I was using a really neat tool called HyperAgent. And HyperAgent is a software where you can create multiple AI agents that end up running on their own and basically running in continuously to make sure that their tasks are being completed. What I ended up doing was creating what I called an orchestrator agent. My orchestrator agent, I gave specific instructions on how to coordinate builds between the agents. And I want you to think of the same way as the A to A protocol in the same manner, because the A to A protocol, like I mentioned before, is just a set of instructions, a protocol or a policy that your agents will follow in understanding how to coordinate with each other. So the drafting agent or the summarizing agent is going to take that summary and pass it on to let's just say you're a staffing firm. You've got a summarizing agent that takes the whole meeting with a client who's looking to hire on specific candidates. You take that meeting, summarize it, and you pass that summary off to what you call the candidate creation agent. And essentially what it does is it creates the job posting, adds from the summary, from the context of the summary, from the context of the transcript, it creates a job description that it needs to put on to the staffing firm's website or staffing firm's hiring platform. And then you've got another agent that ends up reaching out to prospective candidates, right? That is what you call agent to agent protocol, because you defined what all these agents are going to do, and you've also communicated and laid out what these agents are going to expect from which agent. So the summarizing one knows that it's going to send a summary and the transcript to the job creation agent, which knows that it's going to create or send out an output to the outreach agent. So that's the kind of the way to think about it, is you provide instructions. In the same way, it's like providing instructions to your team of people if you're a manager. So think of the A to A protocol in the same manner. And what I want people to I would say be wary of, because the thing about A to A is that it's a much more systematic approach to AI use. And I feel like a misconception and a misjudgment of how AI is, especially now that you have most people and the way that marketing is done, and the way that people, I would say, overhype AI, is they think that you can just one shot a lot of things using AI, which is the worst way to look at how it's supposed to be used. AI is just another tool. It's not going to replace your job to a certain extent. Um, Mainly in particular because there's so many steps that need to be completed that an agent may not be able to handle. And I would say that the reason why A to A protocol is so important is because this is kind of the moment where AI hype ends up getting exposed. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that most small business owners don't need more tailored agentic personalities. Like, oh, I need the agent to work with me. I think you saw that whenever OpenClaw got released, there was like a personality step that you had to do with your agent. But what these small business owners end up really needing is a lot more cleaner of a handoff. So a cleaner of a handoff, we discussed that earlier, where the agent, the primary agent, is passing off the right context for the input to another agent down your pipeline. So whether the intake agent is using the most powerful model up to date, Fable 5, for those of you who used it whenever it came out before it was banned, or at least taken off from public use, the follow-up agent needs to get the right context, not the incomplete one. So if you're looking for a one-shot solution and you've got multiple steps that you need to actually go through, one shot is going to be very unlikely from any software AI firm that's out there that's selling a SaaS, because most of the time it's not just a one shot. It's a coordination between teams, a coordination between agents. And that's kind of the way that you need to start looking at it is, hey, it's no longer just, let me just drop a prompt into a chat and expect an output that's going to solve all my problems. Like, no, that's not how business works. That's not how operations works. Operations is full of different steps in a process. And viewing an AI system in the same way is the way that you're going to get from just using AI day to day to actually bringing AI into your business, where you might even not. Like, I honestly want to interface with AI a lot less than in the future, because what does that mean? It means that the AI systems that I built are working on my behalf. It's kind of that same way of saying the best way that your employees end up working is whenever you don't have to micromanage them. I was a manager at Amazon, and one of the things that my subordinates and my direct reports appreciated the most about me was that I didn't micromanage them. I only came up to them whenever either, number one, something was needed, or I was just checking in on them. But micromanaging them, what does that mean? It means that you don't trust your employees. I don't necessarily say that you need to trust your AI agents because they're just computation. They're not people. But at the same time, you do kind of have to trust how well your team has built and created this system, or you, in this case, trust your ability, how well you created that system to actually work together. And that's kind of the same way. You don't want to be a micromanager of your agents, because that's how you know that the system is running well. So what I would say is that what most people are going to get wrong is that they're just going to assume that this is something that's only for an enterprise system, because everyone has the budget for it. And here, I'll honestly say that these big companies that you know about, not all of them have the budget for it. I mean, prime example is Microsoft and Uber, where Uber ended up spending through its entire 2026 AI tools budget by April, which is just irresponsible from them, I honestly would say, because they didn't provide any direction to their teams, who are more in particular their software teams, but also like Microsoft, which ended up taking away the Claude Code licenses of one of their divisions. So I would say that this isn't just enterprise architecture. This is actually something that you as a small business operator, or even a medium-sized operator, can actually bring into your business. You just need to have the right methodology, which is, first off, evaluate your process. So number one, evaluate your process, figure out what are the steps to get from point A to point B, whether that's fulfilling for a client, or even whether that's just getting a report from your admin team to your desk. However that is, map it out and then see and work with your team, obviously, is say, hey, where can we have AI hop in? It's going to be a hard and painful task. It's going to be long because you actually have to sit down. You need to sit down with your process, with your operation, and really map it out. That's how businesses end up scaling, is they understand where in their process certain bottlenecks happen, and identifying where those bottlenecks happen. It can be either, okay, do we need to recreate a process, or can we actually bring a tool that can really streamline and fix up that bottleneck? And that's the way that I recommend that people start looking at their new way of integrating AI into their business. So, but that's the first failure point. I know I went on a long tangent about A2A protocol being important, but that's true because that's the first failure point, which is that handoff between AI agents. But there's another one that is even, I would argue, is easier to miss. And it's not about removing work from the workflow, but it's creating more rework. And some of you who have been using AI for quite some time, probably might end up thinking just instantaneously about, oh, we're talking about AI hallucinations. And I would argue that's part of it, but not necessarily. So the big guiding question here is, how can AI agents or AI make individual workers faster while businesses still see no productivity gain? So obviously, the main concern in the market, I watch CNBC, Squawk Box, the morning bell or closing bell, and all of those things on CNBC. And one of the main concerns that a lot of the reporters and the commentators were having was how the market, because there was like that talk about an AI bubble a couple of months ago, but the market was investing into AI, but they weren't seeing any returns because they weren't understanding, oh, how do we measure productivity? Excuse me. How do we measure productivity from investing into this technology? And I think one of the ways that people or companies ended up trying to measure productivity was just in token usage. And obviously, that's a very irresponsible way of measuring productivity, because more token usage doesn't necessarily mean more productivity. And I believe that kind of segues into what we just mentioned, where is AI saving time, or is it just quietly creating a new full-time job, which is like just another way of saying, is it creating more rework? Because at the very top of the show, I mentioned 6.5. Most workers are spending around 6.5 hours a week trying to learn how to make AI usable, because either number one, they prompted it wrong, or number two, it's hallucinating. And this goes back to understanding, where exactly does the AI belong in the system? So what do I mean by that? Well, let's just go ahead through some of the facts that came out inside of a Business Insider article. And it's really interesting from this article from Business Insider. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on the screen. Okay, so I've got the article pulled out from Business Insider, and I love the title that that they named it, is called "The Rise of Bot Sitters," which is honestly hilarious, because there's a ongoing joke that mm, people are now spending more time just sitting around waiting for the agent to do their work. And they're just kind of sitting there monitoring it, making sure it's working. And I have to admit, I myself am victim of that, but am guilty of that. But it is just funny that that's what they named it, the rise of bot sitters. So in this report, you could just go through a little bit of it, but I think I want to point out here is that a new report from Glean's Work AI Institute, with Resist in coordination with these universities, found that white collar workers spend an average of 6.5 hours, 6.4 hours a week, but 6.5 hours a week bot sitting AI. So they're feeding it context, checking outputs, debugging mistakes, and cleaning up errors. And this was a study that was conducted between December 2025 and January 2026. And I honestly find that so funny because it just kind of showcases how our way of working has gotten so much more, I would say, either convenient or different, because to a certain extent, these people are no longer writing the reports that they were either. Let's just say that you're a person that needs to write a report for your manager, or yeah, you collected data. I do this a lot. Whenever I was doing consulting for a manufacturing firm or for manufacturing consulting, one of the things that we were doing as part of our study was conducting time studies of certain processes. And for me, one of the things that I really appreciated about AI was I can unload the amount of observations that I'm having while on site. So I had my note taker out, and I would be talking to my note taker, and I would be saying, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing subjects are there's a little idle time, not because they're not focusing on their job, but because there's a bottleneck happening before." So those are certain situations where having AI at your disposal, I would say, argue increases productivity. But what we end up doing now is that we're bot sitting. So it says here, it says workers now burn an average of 6.5 hours of bot sitting. So it is bot sitting is coined by the report's authors to describe the often overlooked work required to make AI useful. So, and what does that entail? Well, that entails now that, are we really becoming more productive with our use of AI, or are we? I mean, obviously, you'll see that software engineers have become way more productive because AI is really good at coding. But if you're a person who um, ends up having to write reports, I just like to go to reports because it's something that also people are more relatable to, or even reporting on emails. Um, are you saving time, or does it just feel like you're saving time? And I think that's the big question: is, are we making our processes more efficient by providing our employees access to these AI tools? Or are they ending up spending the same amount of time that they did, but it's just this time the reports are looking a little bit better? I would argue it's either or, and it really depends. But there's going to come a point where, to really validate whether or not AI is useful, there needs to be still that raw observation of the process. Because, for instance, in that manufacturing setting that I was talking about, I was an outside consultant. I was doing a time study. And what I ended up doing was, it still took me the same amount of time to write my EOD reports for the clients and for my project team. But at the same time, my reports were a lot more robust. They provided a lot more context. And at the same time, it was a lot more detailed. And of course, I still reviewed it because I needed to. But what did that end up happening for my project team? Well, they ended up having a lot more context and a lot more visibility on, oh, these were all the things that were happening. And quite frankly, when I used to write reports without having my note taker, I would have to recall a lot of things from memory, which is a big issue because sometimes you're in the moment, and you're talking with an operator, and you're really observing the operation, and then all of a sudden something else happens, and then you kind of forget that you need to log something down that you thought was important. But with the use of AI and being able to, for me to talk into a device that I can then take the transcript and pass it into an AI agent, the AI agent then guides me through how I write my report, and I just talk to it, and I write out a much more detailed report. That's kind of I mean, it took me the same amount of time, but I wrote a much more robust report. So could that be measured in productivity? I don't know. It depends. It depends on how you, as your team and as your board or wherever you are, define productivity in your terms. And most of the time, we just say, "Oh, are we making more money?" That's not a bad way of defining productivity. Are we saving money? It depends. It really depends. So, often tedious and exhausting work, the findings highlight a growing disconnect between individual productivity gains and company wide performance, which is what they call the productivity paradox that they're facing. What's interesting about that is this productivity paradox, I think, goes back to what we were saying is we don't know, we're spending money and we don't know whether or not we are getting money, but we're thinking that we're earning money and because we're saving time. There's reports that we're saving time, but where is it? And I think that's the big thing is, are we just throwing money at a tool that ends up pushing the work elsewhere? So no longer is it us writing reports, but it's us providing context and data and all the good stuff that an agent needs to write a report. So that's the big question, because I mean, from my example, it was I ended up writing a report in the same amount of time that it took me to write my reports without an AI agent. That said, the reports that I wrote were a lot more robust. So what are you going to measure productivity on? Because I was still getting paid the same amount whether or not I was using AI. So that's the big question that you as an operator need to ask. And I would argue that these larger companies need to look at it the same way is how exactly are we measuring productivity? Because if Uber is a prime example of that, if we measure productivity just based off of token usage, well, look at where that got them, right? So being able to determine what exactly is productivity in our standards, and oh my goodness, gosh, productivity, man. There's something about in my Lean Six Sigma class where we were talking about what is productivity, and I totally forgot about it. Is productivity the value at which people are willing to spend? I think that's what productivity is. I might be wrong, but I'm going to have to fact check that. But I remember in class what we defined productivity as is the value at which clients or the client is willing to spend money on. So on a specific solution, that's what productivity is. I could be wrong. Someone fact check me on that. But if we can't define productivity when it comes to how we're going to use AI, then it's just going to be a continual unknown. Like, oh, are we saving time? Or are we not saving time? The way I like to think about it is if we're going to be pulling on AI, we have to start thinking of it's capital. It is capital. It is another employee that we're hiring that is being guided by one of our employees. And I feel like trying to clump in AI with an individual's productivity is going to be the wrong way of looking at it, because you're kind of hiring an employee, especially if you start integrating it into your business in the way that I've laid out before, where it's systematic and you don't really know that it's there. But you know that it's running in the background. I feel like that's going to be the way that we should start measuring our productivity is like, oh, well, what's the overall output after we hired on this new employee? And that's going to end up coming down to, okay, if we're not giving it the right protocol, or what are we going to do? So that's just my way of thinking about it. I want to, obviously this is something that's open to discussion, and I really want to be able to really understand what are the different ways of measuring AI productivity, because if we can't define that, then obviously we're going to start throwing money at something that's not providing any returns. And that's the biggest fear that most people are having. That's the biggest fear that most people have, and we don't want to be there. So you got to learn how to measure it. I think that's the big thing is if you end up not learning how to measure productivity from AI, you're just going to be wasting your time. So, but I would argue that most people are going to get wrong that AI is overhyped. I would not argue that AI is overhyped. I would argue that companies that installed AI into broken processes and then acted surprised when human supervision ate all of those gains. So what I mean by that, it's like what we said. Don't act surprised when you end up trying to throw AI into a broken system and expect greater productivity, because think of it this way, throwing in a new employee inside of a broken team is not going to solve any problem. So it's the same way as if you can't solve a broken system, if you haven't fixed your system first, how is AI going to solve it? I don't know. That's just the way of looking at it. So a small business application, one application that you can use is just use AI to draft updates, service summaries, content outlines. It all looks faster, but if you don't standardize any context or what the output looks like or how to actually review certain emails or reviews, you might end up cleaning up AI work, and that's a big problem. That's something that we want to avoid is AI cleanup. So far we have two patterns now. We've got the broken handoffs, right? That was the first problem, and then the hidden cleanup. That's the second problem. Because if you have a broken handoff, you've got a broken output, and then you're cleaning it up, you don't want that. You end up spending more money ultimately because now you're using more tokens, right? So, and the third one is where this really gets serious because lawmakers are starting to use AI governance, and they're starting to turn AI governance into an actual operations problem. So, this kind of leads us into what was mentioned at the top, where Texas, state of Texas, just made AI governance an operations problem. So if someone were to ask you where AI touches your business today, could you answer without guessing? That's a kind of a hard question to answer because sometimes you're like, oh man, what did I use AI for? And then you're like, well, I use it to write emails. And then you're like, oh wait, does it write my reports? And then you're like, wait, do I really write my reports? And then if you're like one of those much more regulated industries, like let's just say you're in medicine, and then all of a sudden you're like, shoot, have I been recording my encounters with clients using a note taker that isn't HIPAA certified? Oh man, that's pretty bad, right? So this is according to HB 149. This is a bill that was just released by the Texas legislature. And it says that Texas HB 149, the Texas Responsible Artificial Intelligence Governance Act, became effective on January 1st, 2026. It establishes a framework that includes mandatory disclosure requirements. Actually, mandatory disclosure, let me pull this up for you. So it writes that it includes mandatory disclosure requirements for certain AI users, including governmental agencies and healthcare service providers. Well, there you go, healthcare. It prohibits developing or deploying AI to incite or encourage certain activities, impair constitutional rights, unlawfully discriminate, or create certain explicit content. It creates civil penalties and gives the Attorney General investigative authority and creates a regulatory sandbox, plus the Texas Artificial Intelligence Council. NIST says that AI risk management framework is intended to help organizations incorporate trustworthiness into the design, development, and use and evaluation of AI systems. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, arguably, I think it means that, hey, you need to watch out what type of systems that what type of software that you're using when it comes into your business. I mean, one case was really interesting how we're currently trying to talk with a law firm. This is my business partner and I. We're currently trying to sign on a multi-million-dollar law firm, which has been looking to increase their annual reoccurring revenue 4 times in the next 3 years. So let's just throw a number out there. Let's just say they're 4 million ARR right now. They're trying to get to 16 million, right? So the big question is, okay, now that we've got a goal, how is that going to be achieved? And the thing that we sat down with them was, okay, well, we could do it 2 ways. Either you can not hire us and hire a bunch more attorneys, or you can hire us and we can help you run a more efficient process that's not archaic, that does use AI, and at the same time doesn't take away from your job, but you'll still be able to hire on more attorneys, but not as many as what you originally were planning. Why is that? Well, it's because now your output from your attorneys is a lot more, and you're also saving a lot more on your administrative side because your admin teams can handle a lot more from your attorneys. And they're like, well, that's a great way of looking at it. So we're in the process of really just trying to map it out for them. But why do I bring that up? Well, it's because this wasn't just an easy, let's just hop over to one of these simple automation softwares and let's just create an easy automation for them. Like, no, that's not the case. It's definitely not the case because of how much regulation is on this law firm, and more in particular, just how much regulation is going to be popping up on this industry in general. Because if you are dealing with clients that are in the medical industry or the healthcare industry, that's going to play a big role into what type of infrastructure have I built around these AI tools to ensure that I'm following standards, federal standards. So you've got standards, you've got policies, and you've got procedures. The standards are things that are happening at the upper echelon. There's our governmental regulations. For instance, HB 149, that's what we see just now. That was something that was released just at the beginning of the year by Texas. And if you're an operator, AI operator here in Texas, you need to be aware of that. But more importantly, if you're just like an everyday, if you own your own clinic, right? If you own your own clinic and you want to bring AI into your operations and all you've got is the ChatGPT business version, I would argue that I don't think the ChatGPT business version is even allowed. But you need to, for us, when we were talking with this law firm, we needed to actually do our research. We needed to know, well, based on these type of bottlenecks that you laid out to us, here's what we recommend, but we can't just build compliance at the end. We need to build on top of compliant tools. And that's kind of the way that an AI operator needs to start looking at is, okay, the tools that I'm used to or the tools that I'm good at using, are they compliant based off of my clientele or my prospects on the industry I'm trying to service? And ultimately, it comes down to the type of question that you've got to answer is, okay, well, if that's the case, if these are the types of industries I want to serve, then what type of tools should I have at my disposal to be able to service these type of clients? And for us, we were like, okay, well, we're fine servicing law firms because we understand how the tools will work together. But more importantly, we also are willing to build on top of those compliant tools. We understand that it's going to cost more, but obviously for us, it's like, oh, this is what we're okay with servicing. If that's not you, then find an industry that doesn't have so many regulations on AI use. So veer away from healthcare, I would say. But that being said, I feel like it always goes back to how you structure the system. Is, well, if there's information that we need to redact, are we going to provide redacted information to an agent that doesn't need it? And the answer is probably not. So then that's when you end up having to create not just A2A protocols, but data governance protocols. So you need data governance documents laid out that not only you need to know, but also your agents need to know. And also, are those data governance documents, are they secure? Are they just on your Google Drive that's free? Or are they on a business workspace that is protected? So these are all questions that you would need to sit down with, talk with your advisors, talk with your team, especially if you're in those industries, especially if you're in those adjacent industries that deal with very sensitive information. You do not want to get into a lawsuit because sometimes those lawsuits can go up to garner up to 12 million, right? You don't want to be in those situations where you're putting yourself at risk. So if you're in one of those industries or you're trying to service one of those industries, I highly recommend that you always focus on building on top of compliance first and then build for your service for your clients. All right. So build on top of compliance first. That's the first step. Build on top of compliant tools learn those compliant tools before you actually start servicing them. Because if you start servicing them and you end up building on a non-compliant tool and you think that, oh, just because I could save a couple of bucks a month in operations because I'm using a non-compliant tool, but don't worry, I'm not passing redacted information into these tools, these AI LLMs. If for some reason your system ends up breaking because for some reason your redacted tool, your redacting agent, right? Or whatever it is that you use to redact information. If that ends up just messing up once and an LLM happens to grab one of those tiny bits of information, you can suffer a lot of you will go through it. You will go through the ringer. And that's why I highly recommend, if you're going into those industries that require HIPAA certification, personal PII information, right? Anything like that, you should build on top of compliance, right? So AI governance is not just a policy. So for a small business, it starts with a workflow. It always starts with a workflow, understanding your system, understanding your process, right? You need to understand where exactly are tools going to be in the process and where exactly are humans going to be in the process. So you've got a tool creating the report, but you had a human doing the review. I don't know. That's one way you can look at that. So you can either overreact or underreact. There's never just a right amount. So you need to overreact, pretending that every 12-person business needs enterprise compliance. That's the best way to protect yourself. If you underreact, you might let every employee experiment with AI tools and hope that you might allow your employees to experiment with AI tools that are not compliant, and you just might hope that nothing sensitive or customer facing ends up leaking, right? You need to know where AI is used, what it touches, and who approves the output, because you don't want to know what happens when it fails, right? So this might be something too legal or too casual for you, but I would argue that the truth is a lot simpler. The policy is not governance if no one can point to a workflow. So figure out the workflow, then you can help determine what your governance is. So, but that brings us back to the real pattern, right? So you've got handoffs, cleanup, and governance. They're not separate. I would argue they're not separate, but they're all symptoms of the same exact problem, which is a systems problem. Because at the start of the show, I said that this is something that is an AI minimalist philosophy. The problem is not the tool, it's the system. That's something that I believe. The industrial engineering background that I come from, it's the same thing. Is the problem is not the tool, it's the system. So for your AI systems, for your AI operations, the problem is not the AI tool, it's the system. Is the system compliant? The system is not compliant if you have one non-compliant tool in there. All right, so figure out where in the system is the bottleneck happening. Where is the system broken? Is it between sales and operations? Is it between the marketing team and sales? Is it between operations and marketing? Wherever it is it between admin? Figure out where that process actually fails. And that's an uncomfortable thing, because if you've been running your business, and this is something that I say to all business owners I talk to, I'm not arguing, or I'm not saying that you're not capable of running a great business. I'm not. But because most of the time they get booty hurt, and that's unfortunate. That's something that's outside of consulting. But I'm not here to say that you're not running a great business. What I am here to say is that there are ways to run your business based off of what you've expressed to me, which is, I want to use okay, great. Well, then let's look at your business and let's figure out where exactly are bottlenecks, because there is always going to be bottlenecks. There are always going to be bottlenecks. We're human, right? Even with AI agents, there's still going to be bottlenecks, right? But where can we minimize those bottlenecks? Using these certain tools. Where can we streamline operations using specific tools and systems, right? So the system isn't compliant because you didn't build on top of compliant tools. That's the end of it. So build the system, first determine the output, figure out the map, workflow, whatever you want to call it, figure out your process, and then build out the system that achieves that, because systems end up scaling. So what is the pattern? What should we leave with today, right? So the pattern today that we find is simple, right? So AI systems fail in the spaces between your tools, because if you don't provide the right context, because that context is going to be the next input, and you don't provide the right output, it's just going to be a snowball effect. They fail when one agent hands off incomplete context to another. They fail when time is saved, when the quote time that is saved becomes invisible cleanup work, because you end up having to clean up false reports or improper summaries by an AI agent. One instance is just a friend of mine was telling me that he had Claude Code write for him a report, and it created a chart. But then whenever he was presenting that chart, they were like, that doesn't make sense. And he didn't review it, and he got a firm correction for that. So time saved ends up becoming invisible cleanup work. And then they also fail when governance means a document somewhere inside of your business, instead of having a clear map of how you move work from one agent to another, right? So if you just provide governance as a document, but you don't actually tell or identify and know where one agent is taking context from another, because you're going to end up having you're going to have to map that out, right? You're going to have to understand, where are my AI agents working? Where is their input? Where is their output, right? So map out the workflow, define your handoff, and more importantly, name the review point, right? Then once you've mapped all of that out, then that's where you can add where AI belongs. So at the end of the day, remember, your business is not suffering because you have an AI problem, especially if you're using AI now. If you've got a ChatGPT subscription, your business is not suffering because you've got ChatGPT is not doing its best. Your business is suffering because you have a systems problem, and it's your job to be able to identify where that system is failing, address it, and then see whether or not you can bring AI into it. That's all I've got for today. I'll see you guys in the next show.